Next, we will go to, let me just check with Vice Chair Cummins. Do you think we should have a break? Does anyone need a 5-minute, 10-minute break to come back to the screens? You have a recommendation, Vice Chair Cummins?
No, I'm okay for a little bit, but it's just me.
I couldn't hear you, sorry.
You can ask, so if people need a break, you can ask for people to like check a yes or a no on their or raise hands or whatever, but
okay, well, should we just continue then?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right. Next is the superintendent's report. Superintendent Dixon.
Good morning. My turn came just when construction trucks are rumbling up the street, so hopefully you can hear me okay. I should have some slides coming up from Sarah. It's nice to be with you all, by the way. Good to see you. Today we're going to talk about a couple of things. I'm going to run through a few slides that I've been sharing with our superintendents and charter directors, talking about the way forward. And then I want to talk about the CARES Act funding and then also legislative action on budget. So Sarah, can you put the slides up? I'm not seeing them.
I'm seeing them on my screen.
Oh, you are? Okay, I'm not. See what I need to do to see them. Oh, I've got them now. Okay, I went to Sarah's screen. All right, so you can do the next one, Sarah. Thank you. So I want us to just frame this around being able to move forward together. And you've seen this graphic organizer, and it's really been widely used. I know West Ed picked up on it, CCSSO and others, really liking not only the visuals, but the flow and thinking about one phase into the next. And they really do overlap. So I want to talk a little bit about each of these. I won't spend as much time on the essential 5 because we've talked about that before, but really moving into the summer months and into the fall. So next slide. I want us to think about the board's mission as well as we walk through these next few items, and thinking about how we really are creating equitable conditions for students to be able to succeed. And that really is our role. A lot of people are relying on us for information and direction, I think more so than ever before. But our role is really to try and provide resources and ideas and models for the field so that they can make local decisions. And our staff has really been working fast and furiously to not only gather information from the field, but put models out there. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Next, Sarah. Right now, we're trying to support LEAs, schools, as they think about where their kids are at in terms of academic, social, emotional issues. I know that Kim Herrera, our counseling lead, she gathered some information recently from all of the school counselors and mental health workers. And they are doing a lot of work out in the field, not only with the students, but with adults in the field as well, making home visits, contacting by phone, email, whatever they can do to check on our students. And there are issues out there for sure that they're trying to mitigate. So there's that academic piece and the social emotional piece. And then based on where they're at, figuring out what they need, and then how we help move them forward. And that really takes resources of a variety of sorts. Next. So as we think about the bridge, just think of that visual of the bridge. I hesitate to use the word achievement gap. In this case with COVID-19, there are so many issues beyond the students' control for sure, and beyond the teachers' control. Now that they're out of school, there are all of these circumstances with families working and just all sorts of issues. So given that, we're really in this space of unfinished learning, and instead of blaming the student for those gaps, it's really thinking about, as a system, what we need to do to support their unfinished learning. So we have a lot of diagnostic tools already that can be used. Some states have to go out and make those purchases. We believe that we have plenty at hand. So things like DIBELS, Utah Compose, RISE benchmark assessments, progress monitoring tools that they might have, and then other tools that our schools and districts have that they're using. So we do have a lot of those quick tools in place that our kiddos can use, and some of them are statewide that can help inform our work as well. We really want to make sure that we get a message out into our communities that throughout the summer, students can stay focused, especially on literacy and math, by just reading and engaging in simple math problems 30 minutes a day, and the kind of conversations that we have with our children to build vocabulary. So kind of keeping that learning focused throughout the summer without it being too overwhelming, with the opportunity, if it's safe, for students to come into school in small groups for instruction, tutoring, one-on-one small group instruction, and also keeping some remote learning going out into the homes. We're also working on a resource hub for educators. Jennifer Thronson has been leading this work, and really consists of high quality instructional materials. There are so many materials out there. You can find anything, and I'm really proud of our state that we already had a lot of resources on UEN Learn at Home that was available for teachers, parents, and students, as well as all of the things that are in our schools that our teachers have been working on. But we want to focus on making sure that the materials that are being used are high quality, and helping teachers understand how to ascertain whether or not the materials that they are using are not only aligned with the standards, but high quality in nature. We know from the information that we've received from students, parents, and teachers themselves that some of our teachers feel like they have gaps in their own skill set in being able to deliver online. And in some places where our districts or charters leaned into digital teaching and learning early on, they were able to be pretty nimble and jump pretty quickly into that platform, and even be able to send packets of material that were non-digital home, but still interface with students using a variety of platforms. We also want to help systems think about social emotional skills that are taught in content. So rather than it being a lesson that's pulled apart, it's thinking about some of the essential skills of collaboration and creativity and perseverance and kindness, all of those kinds of things. How do you embed those into content so that it becomes more natural for our students and our teachers and families? Thanks, Sarah. One of the things that we're following then as we move through these phases are the levels of risk that are on the Utah Leads platform. So I think they're up to the version 4 right now. I know that the moderate category was adjusted yesterday for a couple of things. So that gets updated week to week, and we follow that closely. Right now we're in the moderate range, but thinking about high risk, moderate risk, low risk, and then normal risk. And being able to adjust as a system is really tricky. And all across the state, as I meet with my peers twice a week, we are talking about these very things. How do we create scenarios where at any given time we can be nimble? And so that really means a new level of adaptation that we haven't seen before. Everybody wants to know, I'm sure they all ask you as board members, what's going to happen in the fall? Will we be open? And again, that will just be according to the level of risk. So we have to think about some different models. If we're still in that moderate or even low risk where schools are open, according to Utah Leads, but we have to amp up some safety conditions. So there are some staffing models that LEAs can think about right now. Looping that you've heard of, where the current teacher stays with them for another year. And that might be really helpful in our lower grades, especially for students who have been feeling stressed, even if they loop for just a month or 2 months to transition them, or maybe it's during the year. There could be some co-teaching models where this has been primarily in thinking about co-teaching. It's tended to be in a special education and gen ed where teachers teach together, but thinking about it in different content and different ways. So it's a shared delivery model. Perhaps there's a teacher who's really adept at teaching online in 3rd grade, and maybe one who is much better in the classroom. And those 2 teachers could share students and have different forms of delivery. so that if there are staggered schedules as well, that on some days it's learn at home and some days at school, or kids are coming to school at different times, just depending on the safety factors of how many students can be in the building. And then, of course, we're looking at blended learning models anyway, as we've been moving towards personalized learning and competency-based. That really lends itself to blended learning, and some of our schools are already participating in that space. One of the big areas that we need improvement on, regardless of the level of risk in the phase that we're in, is better communication with families, and it needs to be consistent and clear, and paying especially paying attention to those families who traditionally just are challenged by navigating school anyway. Families who don't speak English as their first language, families who come from a refugee status. So a lot of it is just navigating normal school, and then you put them into this space with a lot of digital tools, and depending on their access to those tools, it can be really difficult to communicate. We've had, as I mentioned earlier, our counselors going out and making home visits and using every method that they can. When a student basically disappears from any kind of communication, they're really trying to work with the parents. And in some places that's been really successful and parents have appreciated it. And then in other places, and with certain situations, they just can't contact the parent or student at all.
Not to the same level. He listens with me.
So somebody's caller.
Yeah, we gotta make sure people are muted.
Thank you, Sarah. So we've been talking to states and really kind of looking at what other countries are doing. If you follow other countries that have started to reopen schools like Denmark and Italy, Sweden, Taiwan, South Korea, what are some of the things that they've been considering? And certainly we know that we need to step up health and hygiene measures, and I'll go into those in a little bit more detail. They've looked at lower class sizes, and that's where some of those things like staggered schedules, blended learning comes into place. In some countries where their class sizes have already been like at 15 and 20, then they've lowered those class sizes to 6 to 10. But most have kind of tried to lower them to 12 or fewer, and then you can space them appropriately for distancing in the classroom. And that itself is a question. You know, what does social distancing look like for students in a classroom versus what we expect now with adults? Many are bringing younger students in early and really focusing on the younger students, and maybe starting middle school or high school, kids coming in a little later. People are adopting new calendars. So rather than the traditional start of August 28th or 20, I'm just making up dates, but you would bring them in the first week in August or maybe later into the year. So some people are adjusting calendars, looking at vacations differently, et cetera. They're also looking at different attendance policies, and you've already started having this conversation. And for us, as we think about funding schools through average daily membership, and taking attendance has been important along with that. I've been encouraged with those who are talking about stopping perfect attendance awards and those kinds of things that actually have a negative consequence for students who come to school sick because they want that perfect attendance record. So really thinking about what attendance looks like. In many places, they're not having any large gatherings, so that's assemblies, back to school nights, those kinds of things that have been traditionally done in the past, and finding ways to do either some of those things virtually in the evenings for parents, or small groups of students, but really mitigating all of those large assemblies and group gatherings that we're used to. And then again, thinking about how we continue on with remote learning, so it becomes a way of being for families that we can just be really nimble. And again, these are things that states are all considering. And then last but not least, I just can't emphasize this enough. We have to really support our families and students with wraparound services of counseling, emotional and social supports. So I want to drill down a little bit on the safety with health and hygiene. I've already talked about social distancing. Working with our local health departments and our state health department has been great. The local health departments have been working very closely with their schools and their districts. And as we move into various modes of risk, then something new crops up. So At first, it was talking about graduation and trying to prep for graduation ceremonies. Now things have been loosened up, as we all know, and part of that moderate was allowing kids to come and practice on the fields in groups of 20 or less, but still no sports, but kids could maybe practice. And so now our schools are having all of the leagues that are summer and competitive leagues who would normally use their fields come and ask to play and to practice. And so our local health departments again leaned in with all of their district and school leaders to determine what that looks like in a safe way. Think about masks for adults. That's a possibility depending on the risk level, and especially for high school students, it's a possibility. The recommendations say for kiddos who are 3 years old or younger, masks are probably not a good idea, but for kids older than 3, they seem okay. But that would be something in the future. Do we require them? Do we recommend them? But maybe we require them for adults. The protocols for busing are going to be tricky. Deputy Norman checked with Ron Litchfield, our wonderful transportation specialist, and he's already been working with UTA to look at what they're doing in terms of plexiglass around the driver and how that might be adapted for school buses. With UTA, there are multiple doors for riders to come in and out of, not so with kiddos coming on and off buses. So thinking about all those protocols for safety in busing. We've learned a lot through food prep and delivery. Our school foods workers in our schools have been amazing, just amazing. I don't know if any of you have seen this video going around on social media, but may the force be with you. On the 4th, one school, all of their food workers and others dressed up in Star Wars characters so that when kiddos stopped to pick up their meals, they were greeted by Star Wars characters. So people are just being creative. They're using bus drivers to get into remote areas. They've just done tremendous work, and that some of that will need to continue in thinking about the safety of our foods workers as well as the food prep for kiddos. I already talked about smaller numbers of students in classrooms. So as we're in this moderate phase, learning what that looks like maybe in the summer and then transitioning into fall, we'll again have to provide a lot of modeling for schools that they might want to choose from or do something on their own. I've talked about a lot of these. I want to jump down to protocols for symptomatic and asymptomatic students and adults. This is something that we're learning about over time on the COVID calls and the briefings that I'm on almost daily. At first, it was all about symptomatic, and testing is still super important. But now we're learning that there are a lot of asymptomatic students and adults who have the virus, but you can't tell through what you normally would be able to tell that they have, that they are carriers. So what are the protocols that we will have in place coming back to school? If a student shows up and is symptomatic, then what is the protocol? And what is the protocol for kiddos who might have been in the class or been exposed, and even asymptomatic? I think I reported to you last time that we surveyed just to find out if we had decent thermometers in our schools. Betty Sue Hinkson did a great job. She got well over 700 respondents out of 1,100 schools, and they run the gambit. Anything from nice forehead swipes to a mercury thermometer in one school. So that's a possibility of a way we might use some CARES Act funding to purchase thermometers. But if you've been following along, you know that those are really hard to come by now. So those are in short demand. But we really need to look at our medical kits and make sure that there's personal protective equipment for front office workers, should they need it, that we've got masks in schools, that we have updated thermometers, and then frequent sanitizing of surfaces. Not many of our schools have automatic soap dispensers where it's a no-touch soap dispenser. Those are high-touch surfaces. Think about doors with the kind of handles we have walking in and out that are high-touch surfaces. Do we have enough wash areas? One of the recommendations in these countries that have opened up is students are washing their hands every hour, regardless of what they've been doing. They just go wash every hour. And do we have enough wash areas in the school to make sure that happens? We have some classrooms that don't have those available. And then hand sanitizer. That's not something that you often see in schools, the hand sanitizer dispensers along the walls. So all of these things will need to be considered, and we can use some CARES Act funding for those. In fact, let's go to that next slide, Sarah, and we'll talk about how can schools afford some of these things. So you've all been hearing about the CARES Act funding that is coming to us, and I sent you the application. I believe it was yesterday. We applied on Monday, and the application was pretty simple. It was just checking assurances, but then some narrative about how we would comply with what they're asking, and that's just making sure that we can monitor that they are spending it on the correct items, and the list of categories was there on the application. We thought it would take a week or two. That's what we were told, to turn that around, and we received word on Wednesday yesterday that we were approved. So 48-hour turnaround, which is, again, amazing how quickly the federal government is turning around our applications. So that money will come to us, and it will be loaded into our grants management system, and we'll receive, as you can see here, almost $68 million. 90% of that will go out to the LEAs in a formula. We've already sent the LEAs that formula. Patrick and Deborah have been working with them, and they have those updated numbers, I believe, and if not, they'll get them on Monday. We can set aside 10% of that. 5% can be used for administration, but then the rest of that, the 9.5%, is to look at where we need to plug holes and gaps and spend it on the same things that support our LEAs. So for example, I just mentioned the updated health kits and thermometers. That's something that we could buy statewide and do a bulk purchase. I'm going to show you in a minute a survey so you can see the things that people want to spend money on, but there are also some schools who didn't qualify for the ESSER funding because it was based on Title I formulas, and it's about 2/3 of our Title I funding. So if you were a school who chose not to accept any of those funds for the last couple of years, then you didn't qualify. So we have 1 district and 11 charters who wouldn't qualify for that 90% of the money, but some of that 9.5 set aside, we can actually provide some funding for those schools as well, so that every school is getting some money. It's a reimbursement formula, and this is something I want to talk to you a little bit about. The reimbursements can begin when President Trump declared a national emergency, which was March 13th. And they can be used for reimbursement costs related to COVID-19 up through September 30th of actually 22, but we put 21 because the federal government has given us 2 different dates, but all reimbursements and drawdowns have to occur before September 30th of 22. So we have a good period of time to reimburse costs and make sure that needs are met. This isn't going to be a turnaround in a month or 2 months. It's going to be a couple of years where we'll have to mitigate some of these issues. And then we did conduct a survey before we even put our application in. I know other states are doing it after. We jumped on it and did that before, and then I'll share some of those with you, but it helped us to determine what some of those larger needs are. The GEAR funding comes straight to the governor's office, and you can see the amount of money they get there, the $29 million, basically. And that is applicable to K-16 needs, and it's a little bit more wide open. It's not the same application. I'm so appreciative of our governor and his office who want to target that at K-12. And they also worked with Commissioner Wollston-Hume. And I'm so grateful that he said, well, obviously we would like some money. We know that those kiddos are going to be coming to us. And as the students come to us, we want them to be prepared. So use it for K-12. And that's fantastic. I appreciate everybody understanding our needs and wanting to help. I will say that higher ed, out of the $300 million that we were getting, they got the largest chunk. And a lot of that is to help students with grants, et cetera. So the governor's office is working very closely with us, and they have been looking at the survey results that we sent out and received back. They're also looking at current funding formulas for things like EARS and other places where they can target more equitable practices to determine their allocations. And then they're also focusing on the governor's area, which he's very focused on early learning and social emotional learning. So looking at those. Deborah, thank you for the correction. It was actually 22 charters who didn't qualify. So I just want to restate that for the public. So there was one district and 22 charters who didn't qualify for the ESSER funding that will help support them with additional money. So that was a quick drill through the CARES Act funding. And this is something that we'll continue to not only report to you on, but there will be some decision making on behalf of the board, some action that you can take as we move forward with that set aside from our office as to how we support schools. So let's dig into the survey a little bit. I'll show you a pie chart. Jill put this together. The survey went out via Sarah, and Jill Curry put this together in a graphic form, and I can send you the full results. It was a lot of data to send to you during board week, but I'll send that out today. You can see here, based on the breakdown of the funding that we have, and again, this is our 90% that goes out to them, helping them think through, or they were helping us think through, rather, how they might need to spend it. The largest chunk in the blue category, is designated as other activities necessary to maintain operations and continuity. And as you look at there was a box for narrative, and in the narrative, as I read through all of their statements, a lot of our LEAs are concerned about thinking through how they might be short funding. And so it might have been paying people, teachers, to keep going. Maybe it was for some additional work, some tutoring. It might be just general keeping buildings open in the summer. So it's really kind of that M&O piece where they were just unsure and thinking they might need some additional funding. In the summer learning space, you can see that's the next piece, that orange wedge, and that's summer learning after school, and really targeting individual students who just have some unfinished learning that they need to continue on with. In the gray box, that's about technology. And I might go back and just say, this is total of charters and districts together. When you break this apart by charters versus districts, it's pretty similar, but this is an area where there's a difference between districts and charters. The amount of technology funding that charters believe they will need is about double of what districts were asking for, or rather, I should say, double of what those schools involved in digital teaching and learning asked for, but it's definitely higher on the charter side. And then again, when you dig into that further in the narrative, it's not just about buying new digital tools, but it's things like they've been out in the homes, and so if they don't get one back, they need to replace it, or if it needs repairs or updating software or whatever it might be. So it's both maintenance of what they have and replacement costs, in addition to schools who had not invested in digital tools to be able to send home, to be able to buy those. The yellow wedge is planning for coordination during long-term closures. And again, some of that is thinking about personnel, communication with parents, doing a better job of some coordination. And then the rest you can see, I know it's small text, but I'll send the whole thing out to you so you can dig into it a little bit more. But you can see the other categories are things like providing mental health supports, purchasing supplies to sanitize the schools. That's kind of that brown wedge. A lot of coordination with health services and other agencies, and then some training and some professional development support. So those are all the categories that they're concerned about. But I thought you'd want to see this and note that just that general maintenance of operations is the highest category, with summer learning being the next, and then technology the third. Okay, we're almost done, and then I'm going to pause, and you can ask all sorts of questions or make comments. All right, this is so that was interesting and helpful to know how we can spend CARES Act funding, and our staff has really been on top of it. I think we've attended at least 10 different webinars. So Rebecca Donaldson she'll be the lead on working through the grants, and Sarah Young has been our lead in getting the application in, and she will continue to do so. So we'll kind of have a lot of people working on various aspects, but those are really the two main leads, Rebecca and Sarah. So let's talk about funding the future. We got the sober news that we were all expecting that budget cuts were coming, and it just felt like, I think I've had a stiff neck for a few weeks because it was such whiplash of celebrating this high of $403 million in new funding and being so excited about these programs that we have just been working on and hoping for, and they got funded this year, and we celebrated, and we've just been on a high, and then COVID walked through the door and we went to a low with the crash in the economy. And that means that our budgets are heavily impacted. So HJR, the House Joint Resolution 301 came about, and we talked about this with you last month, but basically we were encouraged to not engage in any new spending, really making sure that we base next year's budgets on House Bill 1. So there is a deadline that LEAs have to have a budget together, and they have to put that budget forward. They sent it to us and we sent it all up. I believe Patrick and Deborah can correct me on the process, but there's a deadline by which they do that. And it's always based on the new money. And this year is different because we had to go back and say, you need to go back to House Bill 1, which was base plus growth, and plan your budgets there. So that's what they're turning in. Then in addition, we've had legislative guidance to look at our budget as well as the funding that goes out to the fields in the form of MSP and other funds, the flow through funds, to look for reductions at 2%, 5%, and 10%. So we're working on those scenarios right now to just think about what that might look like. Then you as a board are going to have to make some decisions that we will present to the legislature, and I'll talk more about those dates. Some frames that we're looking to guide this work to give you a starting place is thinking about what is essential to the work, excuse me, to our outcomes for kiddos, what is helpful to have, what is nice to have, and even nice to have, you could say it's necessary. And then do we have some services or programs that have been legislated that are duplicative? So those are some things that we're thinking about as we're going through and making some determinations. Of course, we're trying to protect people and programs wherever possible. So here's the legislative dates as far as we know. Emily and Ben have been gracious to send these out to us and try to help us backwards map a little bit. So let's go from the bottom of this list upwards. The week of May 31st through June 6th, or maybe June 7th through the 13th. So end of June through beginning of June, there will be a special session to address budgets. The week prior, or a couple of weeks prior, in the week of May 24th through the 30th, there will be appropriation subcommittee meetings, and that date has not been established, but that will be a time where they will then make recommendations that will be heard in the special session. And you'll see board meetings on each of these weeks. I know Lorraine sent these out to you, I believe yesterday or day before, to give you a heads up. So we'll have a board meeting that will coincide with some of those appropriation meetings. The week before that, you'll have a board meeting because that will be critical for you making decisions where we will then present to the Public Ed Appropriations Subcommittee. The week before that, which is May 10th through the 16th, is the space where there will be an Executive Appropriations Committee meeting. The 13th is the tentative date, but decisions won't be made at that time. In fact, we're hearing that they really won't even have the revenue projections finalized at that point, but there will be a discussion about the various budgets that they're looking at. So the day after that meeting would be a perfect time then for you to have the board meeting. And I think your leaders, Chair Huntsman and Vice Chair Cummins, can talk more about it. But I know that setting those meetings every Thursday at 1 o'clock will be really helpful through this process, and not only helpful, but critical in the way forward. While we're talking about funding, there are likely to be some policy changes that we may need to ask for as well in relation to the funding. Maybe some reporting features or other policies or rules that you feel like you need to implement as something new or temporary suspend or waive. So I know I took you through bottom up, but just thinking backwards from early to mid-June when decisions are made and the work that we have to do between now and then. And the last slide that I want us to think about through all of this, because it is Teacher Week and a Teacher Appreciation Week. I want to take you through an exercise, but I'm going to go back to that last slide and have us answer any questions you might have and just have you be thinking about these things because I'm going to call on you. Sorry, Sarah. Will you just go back to the last slide for a second? So we're going to come back to this and end my report with you thinking of your favorite teacher who influenced your thinking, behavior, skills, and her knowledge, and then be prepared to share by naming the teacher and using one sentence about his or her influence on your life, okay? So I want to end on that positive note and celebrate our amazing teachers. So now let's go back and just ask what questions or comments do you have about what you've heard? And Sarah can flip back to any slide that you wish for reference.
Okay. Thank you, Superintendent. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins, do we have people in the queue, or maybe at this space, because there'll probably be a few. In the interest of time, I'll turn this over to you, and you can call them out as you see them, and then would that be best?
Okay. Board Member Lear.
I have two completely different questions, and I'll ask, I think both are pretty quick. My first is, as you mentioned, summer learning, and actually I was texting with Jenny at the same time, but I'm concerned that teachers are going to be expected to just continue to teach during the summer without getting any compensation. Is the CARES money, could the CARES money be used for extra pay for teachers?
Yes, absolutely. So that if you remember this blue wedge right here in maintenance of operations and continuity, teacher compensation is included in M&O. So it could come from there. It could also come from that orange wedge as well. So it definitely can pay for teachers. What it can't do, let me give this caveat. And Sarah, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember reading something that what you can't do is go back and say, our teachers worked extra hard during this time, so we're going to give them a bonus, right? But you could pay them for extra things that they've done, and that includes working in the summer. And again, this is to mitigate the effects of COVID-19. So you can't take that and say, we're going to give them a 1% raise this year, all teachers, or a bonus for all teachers, but definitely to do the very things you just illustrated.
And second question, thank you for that response. It's unfortunate, the private sector would never, would of course allow bonuses, would of course allow compensation across the board for extra work that's already taken place. So I think it's unfortunate, but even making sure that they can be paid for summer work, I think would be excellent. Secondly, and I think you answered this, if wherever the reductions are to the USBE and or to going out to LEAs, the board, it sounds like, will be able to weigh in on those decisions. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So we'll bring those before you for action, and there will be two different ways to do that. One is that the cuts to our office staff, and I don't mean that by people, that came out wrong. The cuts to our budget, rather, those are things that are not necessarily within the legislative scope, but they are line items that come through the legislature. So we would present all of that to public ed appropriations, and that would be based on the action you take to approve what we present to public ed appropriations. So it will be the board's recommendations.
Thank you.
There are no other hands.
Okay. If I might just weigh in.
Sorry, Board Member Earl.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I can't tell how many hands are out there, so I just kind of waited, so I apologize for that. I do have a few questions. I'm hoping as we move forward that some of the legislation from this year that would require us to do hiring, I'm hoping we're being cautious about that to if we actually have funding for those particular programs. Oh, sorry, I could put my video on as well. I do have a couple of comments or a couple of things. I know that you indicated that social emotional essential skills are intended to be embedded within the curriculum. That's kind of an interesting thought, especially where we've removed classical literature to a certain extent, gone for more informational at our younger grades and in other areas. But the classical literature actually has most of that information already there, those things, those human nature elements and that kindness element and different things. So I hope we would move more towards back towards using classical literature type of a thing instead of trying to use stories and then try to figure out ways to put in social emotional learning into a story someone has just constructed for a particular lesson or something.
Board Member Earl, can I comment on that? I think that's a typical example exactly of what we're talking about, that instead of there's some great social emotional curricula out there, don't get me wrong, and schools are using it and should use it and can use it, but your example is great. It's thinking about what do we have in literature, in classical pieces of literature that can illustrate social emotional learning? What do we have in the fields of science and social studies that can illustrate some of these concepts like perseverance and hard work and, some of those kinds of things. So scientific processes take a lot of those kinds of skills that we frame as social emotional skills. So just trying to be more explicit, whether it's in classical literature or the scientific process or in history, social sciences. So we're trying to be more explicit to help point out where those opportunities are rather than adding another new curriculum to teachers' plates.
Great. I hope we can lean back into more of the classical literature and items for that. So thank you for that. I do have a question as far as our application, or a few questions, but I do have one specific. Is it common to submit an application to the federal government without an approval from our state board? I don't know. Do we do that frequently? This is just one I was a little surprised about. So maybe if you could add some clarification to that, or when that's normally happened, or what we foresee that happening in the future.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. This was a little bit different application. Applications in the past have been either competitive or something that it's an additional pot of money that we may want to apply for, and it has certain strings attached. This was a little different in that it's emergency relief money that's coming out to the states. So you just had to show that you were willing to accept it. So it was a bit different in process, and there was some expediency involved. So in that, we could have slowed down the process and taken it to you, I guess. So I'll own that, but it was my understanding based on conversations that we had with leadership that we were okay to go ahead and submit it. So that's something that we can make sure.
We can hold, and we can hold a meeting, by just setting up, right? I mean, if we know what's coming, we can hold a meeting at a different time, different day for that purpose. So I was just a little surprised by that. I have a question on our 0.5% that we are using. Will we have a say in that, or is that already, have you made directions? Are we looking at personnel or equipment, or what kind of a direction are we looking at with that? Are you gathering data from our individuals at the State Office of Education? How is that being looked at?
So going back to the survey again, we're looking at the survey results, seeing what the LEAs say that they need. We actually had them try to indicate the percentage of money out of their pot of money that they would spend in those categories. That's where you saw the different percentages in that pie chart. And then any additional money that, for example, if it wouldn't meet their needs, how much in addition would they need? And that's another part of the narrative that you'll see when I send it out to you. And in that part of the survey, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, but I think it was about 21 million additional dollars that isn't accounted for in the CARES Act. So we would want to drill down and bring to you in that 10%, here's what we think the best use of this money will be, and definitely have you weigh in. Because we're trying to get the data from the LEAs to see what they need. In terms of the governor's money, while we're collaborating with them, of course, they're going to make that decision. And what decision they make will also inform, we're kind of trying to inform each other. So the board would say, here's how we think we need to spend that 10%. Governor would say, here's how we're going to spend our money to offset the flow through money that you're getting.
My last comment, at least for now, has to do with, it just is, I'm hoping as we move forward, especially where there's lower risks for children, that we keep in mind the humanity of childhood as we're moving into, this fall and such, and that we're creating environments that are also conducive for children, especially where the risks are lower for them. Keeping in mind the needs of our personnel that are there as well, that we're not just, in an effort to keep people safe, so to speak, that we're not forgetting all components of humanity. So I would very much like to be part of those dialogues that are going on, and I would love to see this survey so I can understand what the LEAs are looking for. So thank you.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about your humanity piece so I understand? Are you just talking about the culture and the environment of the schools?
Yeah, so, the idea of a first grade classroom where kids are having to stay 6 feet apart from someone, as much as that might be a nice picture, I'm not sure that, that's very conducive for kids as far as both their social emotional development as well as, and the other idea is that the more regulations we have in place as we go back to school, the more you're going to have policing of each other. And so just being careful that we minimize the amount of regulations to the point where it's understood, we're careful, but we're not trying to police each other as far as children or teachers or, that kind of a thing, but we're able to provide environments that are compassionate, but also able to meet the needs that we have educationally. So that's kind of where I'm leaning into that.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
Chair, there are no other, there are no other hands, Chair, sorry.
Okay. Well, we definitely are going to we've got a lot of work to do moving forward. Superintendent, did you have any other concluding comments?
Yeah, so it looks like we've got 10 minutes left, and there's nothing wrong with ending a little early, but the way forward is to take those, so we'll be taking those levels of risk and putting protocols to each of those levels so that it's really clear when if the state moves to a yellow or even a local area, right? So it could look one way in one county and a different level of risk in another county. So working with our local and state health departments are critical. And what we're trying to do is create a list of protocols, including all the things you picked up, to be nimble and move from level to level. And we've got lists of people to engage with that run the gambit. And again, we'll be coming back to you for your recommendations and support.
Okay.
Board Member Earl has her hand up.
Go ahead.
I do have one more question. I am on, okay, make sure I'm unmuted. I do have a question on the technology end of it that was referred to in our application that we sent in. There was, I think, an additional $3 million for infrastructure. It talked a little bit about, and I'm guessing it's the UTN. They're getting out to all locations. It referred to San Juan specifically. I was wondering, is that just, do we know? Because I know that's something the state's aggressively been working on and funding. So is this, I just wondered if that was a different recommendation than we are currently working on, or is that additional funding or funding that we have, meaning that we've been awarded through the federal government, or is that a request for more monies to come in? So if you want to, I can find the page on that. I'm sorry, I probably should have.
That's all right. Sarah or Patty Patty serves on the UETM board, and Sarah could probably speak to that.
Yeah, thank you, Board Member Earl. This is Sarah Young, Director of Strategic Initiatives. In regards to the amount that was referenced, that was specific to from the survey of the field. We had 33 LEAs respond that in addition to their allocation of the 90% of CARES funding, they noted an additional $3.49 million more dollars that would be necessary to meet their projected needs. So that's based on the feedback from the field about what those local needs are. That's not specific to any of our statewide projects, although we have been in regular communication with UETN as well as the Governor's Office of Economic Development's broadband experts in terms of addressing those pieces at the statewide level as well.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, so you're saying that that is a request for additional funding or additional needs? So on top of our other needs, that would be an additional request?
Correct, at the local level.
Okay, so that's an additional local request. That's not wrapped into the other funding that's already there. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, there are no other hands.
Okay, so sir, it looks like we have maybe 5 minutes. If everybody could either, if you want to put it in the chat box of listing your favorite teachers and sharing just in one sentence how they influenced you, or hearing a couple of samples, because it is your opportunity to publicly thank a teacher. And we can't thank them enough, just the amazing heroic acts that both of our school leaders, our counselors, our support staff, our teachers, they've just all been amazing. And there are just no words, not enough words to thank them for what they're doing. Oh, anybody?
Chair, I'd like to thank a teacher.
Okay, go ahead, Brittany.
There's a teacher at Hunter High School who teaches pottery at Mr. Frampton, and his efforts in the pottery program have opened up opportunities for 2 of my kids so far into art that they weren't completely interested in at first. So, Mr. Frampton, Hunter High School, thanks for the pottery.
Epic, this is Betty Sue.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Is there any, Brittany, you can see who's trying to get in.
Yep. Board Member Thorpe.
I am, yep.
Okay. Board Member Thorpe.
I'd love to do a shout out for Miss Williams, the special ed teacher at my 8-year-old son's school. When I reached out to her at my wit's end with the work that he was trying to do from home and becoming very frustrated with, she has taken the time to one-on-one mentor him through difficulties and save a little bit of this mom's sanity. So she deserves a Teacher of the Week, teacher appreciation shout out for sure.
Board Member Lear.
Hi, my comments go to, as you might expect, most of my teachers have gone to great high schools in the sky or other places, but I'm particularly grateful for a English teacher I had, honors English high school teacher, Diane Hansen. who encouraged us to write, encouraged us to write in a sophisticated way, and encouraged us to have thoughtful discussions, and also to an interesting choice of Algebra 2 teacher I had, who Richard Smith, both of these teachers at Olympus High School, and Ricky Smith, as we called him, was famous for saying that you Barlows have more guts than brains, but he actually helped me be a better math student.
Board Member Davis.
Shout out to Scott Oates at Brighton High School, creative writing teacher my senior year, helped me to love writing and to want to turn around and be an English teacher for other students and help them to just find their own voices also.
Board Member Gravitt.
I just want to thank my 11th grade English teacher from Bonneville High School, Mr. Hart, who taught me to hold inconsistent ideas in my head at the same time and learned that it was okay to be confused, that there's a lot of growth in that, to find solace in memorizing poetry, to remind me that having an adult read aloud to even 17-year-olds was bonding, and to help me recognize that the obstacles are the pathway. And she helped me believe that I was smarter than I really was, and I wanted to be her.
Board Member Earl.
Yes, mine actually, I have two music teachers that have worked with my children. One, Benjamin Gell, with voice lessons. He's done incredible jobs with my kids. And actually Pamela Smith, who is just an incredible piano teacher. And there's others out there, but these two stood out immediately as going out above and beyond to meet the needs of the children in my family. So thank you.
Board Member Marsh.
Yes, thank you. I would like to recognize my 6th grade teacher who became my high school principal, Mr. Sheldon Richens, for the example that he set for me in how to handle and deal with people with a little bit of sense of humor, but yet also have compassion and a caring thought process as decisions were made. I appreciate him for that.
Board Member Newell. Board Member Haynes.
Shout out to Mr. McBride. Oh, Board
I'm
Member
sorry. This is Board Member Newell. You couldn't hear me, I guess.
No, we couldn't.
Oh, well, I wanted to thank my daughter, who is a 6th grade teacher at Dilworth Elementary, and I really appreciate her efforts that she puts in here every day while we're going through this environment that we're in. And I watch her from time to time teach her students virtually, and I see that there aren't a lot of students that go on and go through the lessons that she has there, but she, through her packets and her constant communication, is reaching out to each and every student. And it takes a little extra effort to do it, but it really makes me have a sense of pride in watching her do that and making sure these children are engaged.
Board Member Haynes.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cummins. I just want to say something about Mr. McBride, who saw a shy fifth grade kid who struggled and made him the banker of a new exercise he rolled out. And it changed the way I was able to communicate with peers, giving me the confidence that I think I still have today. So I love the teachers that see those shy kids and reach out to them. So thanks to all of those great teachers.
Board Member Bolter.
Yes, I just wanted to send a shout out to my amazing sister-in-law, Tracy Bolter. She is a special ed teacher up north for kindergarten and the preschool age kids. And I've just been amazed at watching how hard she's been working to try to reach out to all of her students and to keep in contact with the parents and to make sure that the students are progressing. It's been really hard to do, as we can all imagine, via web chat and phone calls, but she's really put in and gone the extra mile. And then I also wanted to shout out to all the parents who are having to work through all this kind of new normal things that are happening, and I'm sure it's growing pains alongside with their children.
Okay, Chair, there are no other hands.
Brittany?
Yeah?
Sorry, I can't raise my hand because I'm on the phone. This is Laura. May I speak?
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, I wanted to give a shout out to my niece, Ashley Belknap, who has students in Lehigh who are suffering because they either have language barriers or because they don't have access to internet. And so each day she goes and sits in their driveway and teaches them from their driveways and moves from place to place to teach them. So for this pandemic, this is the perfect person to be acknowledging. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Chair, no other hands.
Okay. Does this conclude your report, Superintendent? I think it did.
Yes, sorry, I couldn't scroll up to find my button. Yes, thank you, everybody. And I'm so appreciative of you sharing your favorite teacher thoughts. Thanks, everybody.